Wonderful. Welcome, you guys. It's great to have you here. I see Mo's iPhone, and I see Kathy and Dawn and Lisa, Janet, Lorraine, Jana. Okay, I could keep going and going. This is going to be a really big discussion for us. We actually have about 220 people registered. I guess we'll have about, I'm going to say 80 or 90 show up. People love to go to the webinars when they're live, but also they like to watch the recording. So just so you know, we'll have this whole thing recorded and we'll put all the links in that these people share with us. And I'm thrilled to have these three wonderful experts with us. You probably recognize Sohailla Digsby. She's been presenting with SCW. Oh my gosh, it's got to be 5-6 years now.
Yeah, I think we're up to 7.
You think we're at lucky 7? There you go. We've got Amanda Fairhaley, and she is new to SCW, which is fantastic. So we're pleased to have her. And we've got Sam Roth, who just happens to be my son. So he actually is in our family. We know Sam as being our know-it-all when it comes to nutrition. So whenever we have a question, we contact Sam. Sam is a Ph.D. candidate in Bioinformatics and Systems Biology at the University of California in San Diego, and his research specializes in using next-generation sequencing technologies to understand gene regulation. And if you understand what I just read, please text me now so I can understand. Amanda Fairhaley has been a registered and licensed dietitian for over 20 years and has been immersed in the fitness field for over 15. And her passion is helping others to learn how to use food as fuel and food for improving general health. And Sohailla is a registered dietitian, author, and developer of the life-changing 52-day Best Body Countdown program for fitness professionals, which brings sound nutrition and accountability to their fitness and wellness facilities. So we've got great people. We're just going to go right into it. So what I'd like everybody to do, if you wouldn't mind, move your mouse. Please go to the bottom of your screen. You're going to see the green share button. Go to the left, click on the chat box. Oh, I love this. People have already started typing in. Mary's from Arnold, Maryland. We have John from Cincinnati, Ohio, South Carolina, California, North Carolina, California. Hay from Michigan, Minnesota, Texas, New York, Colorado, Boston, all over the country. So thank you guys for joining us. I asked you to do your chat box because I want your questions. This is your webinar, so please feel free to chime in. First thing we're going to talk about is the skinny on diet trends. So keto, intermittent fasting, plant-based, all these different diets promoting weight loss, different choices. It's very overwhelming. So the first thing is, when it comes to fat loss, should I be counting calories or tracking macros? Now, when the first thing I thought was, what the heck is macros? So Amanda, I'm throwing this at you, girl. So please explain for us.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I'm in Austin, Texas. So hello, I see my Texas friends on here. So macros, it means macronutrients. So when you talk about the foods that make up your diet or what you eat every day, it's carbohydrate, protein, fat. You can include water in there. Alternatively, there are the micronutrients. So your electrolytes, your vitamins, your minerals. So macros is just really a big fancy word for the foods we eat every day. It's kind of catchy because I feel like it's kind of a fad now that people track their macros, and that's not a bad thing, but it truly is just fat, protein, carbohydrate, and water, and that's what makes up the food that we eat every day.
So do you think it's counting calories, or do you think it's tracking? Like if I eat a higher protein diet and a lower carb diet, am I going to be able to lose weight?
Still talking to me?
Yes, I am.
All right. So the general answer is it's calories. Calories are going to day in and day out. If you're at a calorie deficit, right? We've all heard, or maybe it's new to you, but if you're underneath the calories that your body needs for the day over a period of time, weight loss will most likely happen. That being said, depending on how long you want me to talk or somebody else, there's certain, like the macronutrients, protein will probably keep you fuller longer, or fat, slows down digestion. So looking at the percentages of your day will, if you're having difficulty, that's when you kind of start manipulating the macros, so to speak, to see what your personal percentages the total of what you're eating, to see if we can come up with the best plan for the individual.
And Amanda, if I'm a big exerciser, like I'm assuming most people on this webinar are, do I need more protein? Would
Absolutely.
I need possibly more fat? What are your thoughts on that?
So the average exerciser, let's just say an hour a day in there, absolutely needs more protein. A lot of the studies show that when you're on a diet, right, when you're in a calorie deficit, you lose lean body mass. And so yes, you're losing weight, but lean body mass is your muscle. And then in turn, your metabolism is going to slow, or you might not be seeing what you want to be seeing in the gym, whether it's speed, endurance, strength. So there's definite ranges of protein per your body weight, in pounds or kilograms, however you want to do it. The average exerciser needs, it's hard to just throw out a number. 1 gram per kilogram is where I would start. Whereas if you're just, a person who's really not into exercise, is 0.8. So it's slightly above. And then there's a big range depending on your goals.
Very good. Thank you so much. We got an interesting question from Mo. And Sohailla, I'm going to throw this at you because you tend to be the queen of diet plans or healthy eating plans for women. Why is it that when we age and we still eat healthy and work out, that our stomachs start protruding? I love that question because it's on every woman's mind.
Okay, so first of all, about every decade, you're going to lose about 2% of your lean body mass. So your metabolism is going to slow down slightly. And then when you hit 50, that drop goes to about 8 to 9%. So it gets a little more accelerated in your older years, because sarcopenia is just a natural thing that we're going to have to fight and resist. And it's going to try to really happen to all of us. And so not only are we less metabolically active because of that less lean body mass, a lot of times that average 51, 52 age for women that Mo was asking about is related to the time where menopause happens. And in that timing, people are more likely to store their fat tissue in their central abdominal region rather than in their hips and legs. Also, there's 2 times in life, and I think this is super fascinating. There's 2 times in life that you create fat cells, most likely in your 3rd trimester when you're in the womb, and then also in that prepubescent puberty age. And unless you are really gaining more fat than those cells can hold, you don't typically grow more fat cells. You just increase the size of the ones you already have. But because of our obesogenic environment in America, we have so much food and so much access to extra. People's bodies are starting to create extra cells, and that's often in the hips and thighs. And so the good news is if you are gaining it on your waist, you're more likely to be able to lose it from there, because it's not another new cell that's trying to gain new fat tissue. It's a cell you already had. So that's the good news. And it's also good news because it's more motivating, because that's the more dangerous fat in that central region. That's right near those essential organs. But the bad news is that it's hard to do, especially if you're exposed to chronic stress. That's another place you're more likely to store your fat, is in that central abdominal region. Our bodies aren't really meant to have chronic stress. We're meant to deal with stress and kind of rock and roll with our cortisol instead of just have it like we do so much in our culture. So whether it's menopause, chronic stress, those are the 2 main reasons people are getting it around the abdominal region. And because we already have fat cells there where they can grow, just because fat is increasing in general because of that less metabolism, and because we get a little more sedentary as we age without even trying a lot of times, just because not chasing toddlers around so much, just less active time on your feet. You got to be a little more intentional to be on your feet and moving. So there's lots of factors, but those are the main 2.
Oh, that's very thorough. Thank you so much for that. Now we're going to get a little complicated. Are there contraindications for certain diets? So Sam, we were talking just a little bit about pregnancy or diabetes, kids, older adults, high cholesterol, different cancers. What are the contraindications for certain diets? I think you did a seminar on fasting, and a lot of people are very interested in trying to do fasting. And should everybody be able to do that?
So I think it really depends on what your needs are when it comes down to fasting and whether you can adhere. What studies seem to indicate is that fasting is just really not sustainable. People who come out of fasts are way hungrier than people who have eaten every day, even when you match protein consumption. There's the other concern that if you look at the macronutrients, which Amanda explained really well, protein doesn't really store in our cells apart from, performing its function, assembling things, but your body doesn't really know what to do with it. And so, our kidneys do their magical thing. They deaminate it and in a bunch of complicated steps that I'm not going to go into because this is not a biochemistry lecture, it gets excreted via urine. Whereas, something with fat, which we know how that's stored, it's in your fat cells, or carbs, which can be converted into triglycerides and stored as fat, or more commonly, they're taken into muscle, part of glycogen and lean tissue in general. So that can be a concern when it comes to intermittent fasting. In terms of if you're concerned about getting enough protein intake, it's probably not a great idea. There's not a lot of extensive studies on even the idea of what is optimal timing for protein. There's a lot of old wives' tales and what some people would call bro science, but we don't really know. And I think when we don't know, you have to go off of either anecdote or better safe than sorry. I prefer better safe than sorry.
Can you explain what fasting you're talking about? Because some people think, oh, I'm just not going to eat for 3 days and just drink water. Or are you talking about intermittent fasting, like where you only eat between 11 and 7 p.m. or something like that?
I think what I said actually applies to any of those. I think it's unreasonable to expect if you're not eating for extended periods of time that aren't normal, right? Most of us fast at least 8 hours a day when we're sleeping. Hopefully, if you're getting that kind of sleep, I don't. But when you're talking about really going a long time, it's anytime you're really risking the overall protein balance in your body. And it's important to note that this isn't just lean mass. Your skin's going to get worse. Your skin is a large protein layer, essentially. If your internal organs, just on a cellular level, proteins are the engine that make life. So it's really going to be a concern with any extended period. And so it would apply to really any configuration of fasting, probably more for the longer and longer that you're going without food.
And we got a good question from Lisa. Lisa's asking it, she put fasting and VLC diet can actually put you into fat storage mode. Is this a fact or myth? I'm not sure what she means by VLC. Amanda, you're nodding. Can you answer this for Lisa?
Sure. VLC, very low calorie, based on like 700 to 900 calories a day. Absolutely. You can slow your metabolism with either any type of diet, right? So your body likes to be fueled. And if you are going to a certain low calorie level, the very low calorie, 800 calorie studies work short term, right? Because your body's like, wow, this is a great deficit. And then I think it's like after 2 weeks, you've just plummeted your metabolism. Like, crap, what did you do? I'm starving. And so it goes in that conservation mode, right? Like, I don't know when you're going to feed me next, so I'm going to slow everything down, and that's your metabolism. So you can call it fat storage, you can call it slowing your metabolism. But yes, after a pretty short period of time of not eating sufficient calories, that's kind of where and Sohailla might have a different, way to figure it out. But typically, like, it's just a really basic when they say don't go beneath 1,200 calories a day. Most people have that resting metabolic rate just to breathe, for your muscles to work, for your digestion, for your heart to beat. takes about 1,200 calories. If you're 6 feet tall, it's more. If you're 4'10" and 80 pounds, it's less. But so if you're consistently under doing the calories, whether it's through fasting, so if you're fasting and only consuming, I don't know, 500 calories for your one meal a day, yeah, after that 2-week period, and that's going to vary too, your body will absolutely start storing.
How can you rebound from that? All right, so you've kind of been starving yourself. You've got this big event coming and you've been starving yourself. Yeah. And then suddenly it's over. You've lost like the 5 pounds you've been dying to lose. And then you start eating again. And are you gonna rebound even bigger, or how can you balance it back? Sohailla, can you share with your opinion on this?
I can, and this is kind of the area that I've been working in as the cleanup crew from the post-diet disasters that are going on. And I appreciate what both of them said about fasting. And I want to make one point about fasting, if I may, before I say that. There is some really great metabolic benefits to having a 12-hour fast, or to even taking a good long break from eating and drinking between meals. So I wanted to mention, I agree with the both of them that long-term periods of fasting really can be detrimental to your body, especially if you have an eating disorder or disordered eating mentality. A lot of times when people show me their fasting diet list, I look at it and I say, wow, this matches my eating disorder patient's list. I mean, they look the same, and that's not necessarily a good thing in any way, really. So that's one thing that really concerns me, because the fitness population is often errs on the side of disordered eating. But I think a 12-hour break from eating is fabulous for us in many ways. It trains us to have self-discipline. It trains us to plan. It trains us to, plan our breakfast and our evenings. And I think most days of the week, if you could do within 12 to 14 hours, that would behoove us metabolically, diabetes risk, and lots of other things. So if someone is trying intermittent fasting or any of those fastings and they think this is too hard, or I'm not doing well with this, it might just be wise to just try to cut it into 12 to 14 hours of eating. And then it wouldn't do, like Sam was saying, and degrade your protein as much, because you can get your calories in wisely during that time. But what you were saying about rebounding.
So I'm just going to interject. I went to one of your seminars at Mania, and one of the things I really loved about it is you said it's not a problem to fast for, overnight and fast for a 12-hour period, because it also teaches you what it's like to be hungry. Because we went through this period, I don't know if you remember, when it was like, all right, eat small meals and eat it every 2 hours. And you just don't even know what it's like to really be hungry and need the fuel. I'm not talking starving. I'm just talking to be aware of it.
And because you want to learn how to honor that hunger. And, because your appetite's kind of up here when you smell hot cookies or whatever it is, but your hunger's down here where your tummy's churning and all those things are going on, giving you an indication. And I think so many people are out of touch with their body as to whether they're actually hungry or not. And I was in school in the 90s, Sara, when that grazing thing was going on. And I'm like, I don't know who told us that was a good idea. Because if you think about it now, who grazes on like broccoli or salmon or black beans? I mean, we don't graze on those foods. We just graze on like cold fries off of kids' plates and, broken Oreo crumbs from the bottom of the bag, or, whatever it is that just gives us that quick fix for an hour. So unless you can set up all your meals for the day and graze off of those plates wisely and, meet all your macronutrients goals like we talked about, then grazing isn't the best idea. But to answer your original question about can you recover from that? Because right here in front of me, I have somebody's RMR test that they messaged me. And you can get a test like this to see what your resting metabolism is, which is a big piece of your metabolic pie. It's about 60 to 75% of your metabolic pie. It's what Amanda said that you're doing without trying. It's not physical activity. It's not digestion as much, but it's everything else that's going on. And I have a triathlete that I'm working with, and I just want to give y'all a practical example. And she does a ton of cardio and not a lot of resistance training. And so almost all the fuel that her body is using is to, have enough calories for her to do morning and evening cardio workouts and all this. And so when her RMR came into me, and I want to show it to you, but I can't because that wouldn't be good. But her RMR was 1290, which is pretty low for a woman who's 5'7" in her 40s, who's a triathlete. But like you said, when you're dieting so much, remember how I said 2% decline per decade? And people are like, oh my gosh, I'm getting older. I'm going to have such a bad metabolism. I'm like, we're talking 2%, maybe 8 or 9. The decline that you get from under eating is 20%. It's a plummet. And so some of the worst things we can do is under eat. And like Amanda said, around that 800, a lot of times people think if 1200 is not working, I bet 1000 will. If 1000 is not working as fast as I want, I bet 800 will. And they keep dialing back their metabolism. And I think that's what our body is doing. Either we're over exercising and doing too much cardio in this example, and then our body is storing fat. So her fat percentage is really high for being a triathlete. And I believe it's because her body is like, I'm not sure you're going to give me enough fuel to do all that you're asking of me. So I'm going to store this most dense way to nourish myself with fuel. And that's in your fat cells. And so I think it's a very slippery slope, which is why I'm not personally a fan of intermittent fasting or other, starvation type looking, even ketogenic, which is on the starvation type border. I'm not a fan of those for people who want to be strong long-term, because the worst thing we can do as we age is lose muscle mass. And that's what a lot of those diets are doing, is your body is consuming your muscle for dinner because you're not giving it the fuel. And it's a really easy mistake to make under that guise of, well, 1500 calories didn't work, so I'm going to go to 1200, and 1200 didn't work. All you're thinking is it didn't work fast enough, but it might be in the process of working beautifully when then you sabotage it. So I'm really passionate about helping people protect themselves from that plummet. Because it is hard to spring back from. It's really hard to spring back from.
And Sam, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think that there's a grain of truth that metabolic adaptation happens. It's largely a function of body mass changing. As you get smaller, you need fewer calories, and at a certain point you hit maintenance again, and then you have to drop down lower. Anyone who's had to cut weight for a sport or bodybuilding or something, they've all experienced this, where you get to a point where you're like, well, now I got to be even more stubborn about it. I think that there's something that really gets kind of understated, which is that when you look at basal metabolic rate being the majority, well, then after that, one of the biggest sources of calorie burning is what's called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, NEAT. So this is everything you get from, talking with your hands. I'm really fidgety. I'm not eating as much as I was earlier, so I'm less fidgety than the last time that Amanda saw me, for instance. And when I was massing to put on a little bit more weight, I became very fidgety. And that's because my body just had more energy to move. And what people don't do is they don't track their movements. It's like, oh, I'm in starvation mode. I can't lose any more weight. Well, a lot of that can be you just went from 10,000 steps a day to 5,000 because you're so exhausted all the time. And then when you're in the gym, you're not burning as much in there because you're so exhausted that you're not exerting yourself. And so I think that, true starvation mode, which Amanda and Sohailla correctly explained in the case of disordered eating, that certainly is something that occurs. But a lot of the time when people stop losing weight within normal bounds, not, unhealthy or pathological bounds, it's because they're not tracking some of the relevant things, which is how many steps are you taking a day,
So we did, Sam, we did get a really good question from Heidi. What is the best way of eating for building muscle mass then?
So the first thing to say is that there are very few studies on this in terms of what's optimal. And most of the old wives' tales out there, or bro science, I think is probably the more correct thing, is from roided out bodybuilders who are genetic freaks. And so the problem becomes is what source of knowledge? There's not a lot of good data on protein consumption, but anywhere from 1 gram to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight seems to be somewhere near the optimum. You can go a little below that, but in terms of muscle protein synthesis, you also want to be getting high quality protein. So you want your, without getting too biochemical, leucine is something that signals a pathway in your cells to grow. It's called the mTOR pathway. Not going to explain why it's named that, not going to explain what it does. But you can look it up in a biochemistry textbook. So there's the protein side. Then you want to be in a caloric surplus. So the nice thing is that, if you believe in being in something like a, 200 to 400 calorie like deficit for losing weight. It tends to be in the normal range, a little bit more sometimes. You actually want to do the same for surplus. So you need to be eating in a surplus. Per pound of body weight, to answer MBSR Spring. And then there's not really, again, between fat and protein, it's, a little bit, or fat and carbs, excuse me, it's a little bit less well defined. But if you're doing a lot of resistance training, carbs can really help you fuel that training and get the most out of your workouts and get the most, blood circulating. You want to make sure that even if you're going to go low fat, unless you're on certain performance enhancing supplements, you need to be getting enough fat to perform necessary functions. There are not necessary carbohydrates. There are essential fats. So that can vary based on body weight, but, generally speaking, probably between 50 to 100 grams is minimal. Again, this heavily depends on body weight. I'm giving rough numbers, and you want to basically even out that equation when it comes between fats and carbs to what makes you feel best, what is most palatable to get the food down. Because anyone who's gone through extensive fasting periods knows food gets boring and it gets difficult to eat. I was at a point where I was eating.
I'm going to jump over to Amanda for a second.
So that's the general outline. It's hard to give specific prescriptions unless you know the person.
If you want to reverse the diet to slowly recover from under eating, or being an active athlete, you used to be real active, but you have to figure out to recover from that. If you've been cutting back your calories, how do you recover from something like that? What would be a plan you could take? You're muted, Amanda.
Sorry. That's a very broad question. It's a great question. In terms of like reversing a diet, really depends on how restrictive it was and how long the restriction was, or how active you were as an athlete. So generally speaking, for most of my clients, I do go slow because it's really hard to go from under eating to doubling that. Now we were, Sohailla brought it up earlier. If it's a true eating disorder, it is crazy, like the 3,000 plus calories that the recovering patient needs to eat to start gaining weight and to reboost their metabolism. So if that type of question, it is really more of a clinical, very precise method. But I feel, so if you're under eating and you've slowed your metabolism, I personally think trying to build lean body mass back, which you've probably lost, is very important to boost that metabolism. It goes back to if you were yo-yo dieting or if your metabolism is kind of confused. As you increase the calories, we want to increase your metabolism so that your body can handle that. The other, being an active athlete, I don't, if I understand what you're asking, so were you eating more because you were active and now you're trying to rein in the appetite because you're not being as active? Is that the question?
I'm assuming that's what it is.
Yes. That goes back to Sohailla. I love it. It's you really have to be in tune with hunger and satiety cues, right? Because I know, like, if I've been training for something and oh my gosh, like you eat nonstop because you're starving, and now you're in recovery mode and you've really gone back on your training, you're still like, wait, I used to eat all this for lunch and dinner and snacks and shakes, and now I still want it because I remember how good it tastes. So it is a methodical, really I recommend mindful eating and really listening to your body and trying to be satiated and enjoying the food that you're eating.
And you also mentioned, Amanda, that one of the simplest forms is just start writing down your food.
Yes.
Start writing down what you're eating.
If you write it down, then you can see exactly what your patterns are. Absolutely.
And one thing to add, if I may, when someone, and I think Amanda was alluding to this too, if you're asking for a practical step of like, okay, I've just identified myself and I'm sitting here eating, 1,100 calories and I know that I need more and you guys are talking to me, what can I do? A simple thing might be to add 1 egg to breakfast. And, one extra serving of tuna fish on your sandwich at lunch or to your salad. It can be simple things. And I would suggest starting with protein because you're going to want to build your lean mass back up, like Amanda said. And resistance training will help you do that, but you don't want to resistance train without enough calories and protein on board, or you won't recover that muscle that you're breaking down. So you want to start thinking of it as kind of just building back up. So, okay, I need protein. I need more calories. You'll probably need a little bit more from carbohydrate too in order to do that. But I would start with, most people aren't as nervous of adding protein as they are carbohydrate because carbohydrate holds fluid and you see it on the scale. You don't see the protein on the scale as quickly because it doesn't hold fluid. And so I would add one small serving of something lean protein at each meal, and then bump up your resistance training, even if it means you have to cut back your cardio a little bit to help build up that muscle. Because I think the number one thing to help recover your metabolism is to build muscle, but you cannot build it if you're in a really drastic deficit. So you'll need to pump up those calories primarily by protein to do that. So it is possible. It is very difficult. It may not be fully as recovered as it once was, but it's very possible to inch back up, and resistance training with protein calculated is the best way to do it. And you can get a registered dietitian to help you one-on-one with it.
And we had a question from karaoke hostess Mo, who showed up a little bit late, but she's asking about perimenopause and menopause and how does that affect what you're eating? What are your recommendations for carb intake, or if you're an athlete? Anyone throwing this out there?
Okay, I'll go. I'll
Go
tell
for
you
it.
my menopausal, and I'm almost there with you. My menopausal clients, their number one problem is wine. It's not menopause, it's not menopause, and it's not metabolism. It is wine. I know I'm hurting some feelings right
What's wrong
now.
with wine?
I'm just telling you, somebody said, haha, so true. But, and I mean, I know like I have 3 kids, teens and preteens, and my youngest is 11. And the other day, my husband's like, hey, no kids are home. And let's go get a drink or let's go have dinner. And I'm like, oh, this is what's happening to all my 50-year-old clients and patients. Like all of a sudden they don't have as many people there all the time to serve and take care of. And they're able to sit down and put their feet up and have a drink and relax or go out to eat instead of cooking and making lunches and all that. So I do think metabolism is a real thing. It declines as we age, especially if we lose lean body mass. Menopause is a real thing. It helps you store fat, unfortunately not muscle. It helps you store fat in the central abdominal region. So you do have to counteract that. But a lot of times we have to have a metabolic reality check that it's not just our metabolism. It's that entering that stage of life where we may have a little more finances or we may have a little more free time. So super important to have that reality check before we blame it all on metabolism.
All right, I'm gonna throw one more thing in here, and you can quote me on this. Also, when you reach a certain age, your kids move out of the house. Now, I have 4 boys. I never was able to finish a meal because someone was always grabbing something off my plate, and there were never any leftovers. So it's like you clean up and there's nothing. All right. And I really was not a cook. I only just started really cooking this year during the pandemic, which is really wonderful. But I'd go out to dinner. I'd never finish a meal because they're eating off the plate or somebody wants to finish something. It was fantastic. But now it's like if my husband and I go out to dinner, we order dessert. I'm not splitting it 6 ways. I think it's really 75% mine. And that's usually what happens.
Yeah, so it's a culture change that you have to, I mean, one of the main things I work on with my one-on-one ladies in that age range is, okay, pick 2 days of the week to have a drink, 1 day in the week, 1 day in the weekend, or pick your strategic splurges over the week. Are they going to be about 600 calories worth? Okay, make it 100 calories a day for 6 days of the week and then take a day off, or make it 200 calories a pop 3 days a week. Or I help them to look over the week and say, okay, what's coming? Is there a birthday party? Is there a date? Is there a special event that I want to have? Or is there a baking night or whatever? And plan it out and just not rigidly plan it, but just kind of make windows for that so that it doesn't like sabotage you because you have so many events or so many opportunities or so many people are coming over with a bottle of wine or whatever it is, depending on, you know, how socially distanced. And, you know, I'm in Georgia, so I'm not experiencing as much pandemic quarantine as some of you still are.
Yeah. Sam, we had a question here. We're getting a lot of questions. So first of all, I apologize if we're not going to get to every question. But I'm trying to get to as many as possible. Sam, somebody asked about blood type. Is there a certain diet? Sohailla is shaking.
I'm shaking my head at the vodka question that just popped up.
I didn't see the vodka. We'll get to that in a second. But if somebody asked about the blood type, is there a certain way we should eat according to someone's blood type?
No, I think that that's one of those just bro science fitness fads out there that there's absolutely no data for.
And what about, here's a good question from Carrie. What are your thoughts on metabolic efficiency testing, finding your crossover point or MEP to help individuals meet BMR and fuel for exercise? Well, first of all, somebody please define all those acronyms for me and then answer the question. Throwing it up there.
So I'm not sure what MEP is. BMR is basal metabolic rate. I think that we live in a tragic age. I'm going to be the weird one with a computer science degree, but also hating technology while we're on Zoom. I think that it's absolute. I think that people get way too wrapped up in what's the next new technological tool. And, you know, I think it's great to get blood tests. I think it's great to get all that stuff, to get body fat tested. I think the question is it useful? I think a lot of people would benefit from taking 2 weeks to track what they eat, track what appears on the scale, and then inferring what is adequate fuel from that. You know, listen, I'm as scientific and as quantitative as anyone, but when I'm going to do a minor plug, hired Coach Alex Bryce, who's a presenter here, to design my diet and design my workout plan a few months ago. When we went through it, we were like, well, you know what? We're going to start with this on some very basic equations, and then we'll adjust from there if we're gaining weight at the appropriate rate. And you know what? I think that sometimes what people want to do is they want to use the fanciest terminology and the fanciest thing, but ultimately tracking what you see in the mirror, what appears on the scale, and what you're eating is 99% of the information that you're going to get from any test that's out there, other than deficiency tests. That's a very important exception. I'm not saying that.
Okay, all right. And MEP is my zone effort points. So I think that's specific to my zone technology. All right, so Sohailla, talk to me about vodka.
Well, you know how some people say if you don't know, then it can't hurt you. You know how since you can hold a liquor bottle or a wine bottle up and it says nothing about calories, then they're like, well, if you don't know, it can't hurt you. And so a lot of people take that approach. And so I've actually created a little info fact sheet about alcohol and helping you understand, you know, how much sugar is in there, how many calories. Most servings of wine are 5 to 6 ounces if you measure them. Make that point because most people will pour it closer to 7 to 8. And then, and that serving is around the 100-calorie mark, higher if it's a sweet wine, a little lower if it's a dry, like in the 90 range. And then liquor is very similar in its serving, which is 1.5 ounces pour. And the tricky part about liquor is what people mix it with. If it's mixed with a margarita mix, that might add, you know, 150 or 200 calories to it, depending on how tall it is. And so vodka itself, one shot of vodka itself, 1.5 ounce pour is just around that 90, 100 calorie mark. So it's not all that high. So, but there's the other factors of, you know, you might have gone to bed at 10, but now that you've started with that vodka drink, even if it was with Diet Coke or whatever else, you stayed up till 11. Now what happens at 11? It's time for another meal, really, because you're up late. And then it kind of perpetuates other things, you know, staying up, eating longer and other things like that. So it's not just that one shot of vodka is the problem so much. It's just kind of how you pair it and what you put it with. It also does occupy your liver because it's recognized as a toxin. And so it makes your body focus on that more than on some of the other functions that it should. So people who are having kind of intermittent drinks, one before dinner, one after, kind of one in the evening, even if they're not getting drunk and having a huge amount, enough to really send their body a signal that it's way too much, it still may be too much for their liver to process in order to do a good job at its other functions. and it's going to be stored as fat because your body, like we talked about the macronutrients, your body's like, oh, I needed that protein to rebuild your muscles. Oh, thank you. I needed those essential fatty acids to do all these functions. And I needed that carbohydrate to fuel your brain and your muscles. And oh, that alcohol. Okay, I will store it right here on the front of you or on the back of you or wherever you store it. So that's part of the challenge with alcohol is your body doesn't have anything smart to do with it. And so it busies the liver so it doesn't do its other smart things. And then it fills your fat cells because it has nothing else to do to break it into not super scientific explanation.
That's pretty sad. Very sad.
And I'm not here to say it's a never thing. It's a strategically sip it slowly thing.
Well, and I think real quick, it's the portion, right? Or, you know, where I'm not telling you to start drinking, but if you are, I've had so many clients like, yeah, I have wine at night. The minute they measure it, I always get like all these comments. Oh, it's so sad. Like, really? Like, I didn't realize I was drinking 10 ounces. I thought I was drinking 1.5 glasses. And so, you know, the American Heart Association and the health benefits associated with, and I think they tried to change this, but the 1 drink for a woman or 2 drink for men max, you know, once you go above that, then it is the toxin and the calories and all the other stuff, that the snowball effect that we just talked about.
Right. So that 1 glass of wine could help your heart if it's part of a heart healthy, moderate diet. And then once you think you're having 1 and it's 9 or 10 ounces and you're really having 2, it pushes you into that increasing your breast cancer risk that you didn't mean to do. Yeah. So it can easily, because in America, we just don't do moderation so well at all. You can drive up to Dunkin' Donuts and see that, you know, we just don't do moderation so well. And so when people say, well, in the Mediterranean diet, they do that, I'm like, they don't sit home on their TV and drink a whole bottle of wine with the Mediterranean diet. They gather with friends and socially sip 1 glass over a long meal time. So it's totally different, and it's hard to extrapolate into our over-consuming culture. Sorry,
Now,
that's not happy news, but
we also keep hearing about, somebody wrote about this, a gluten-free diet. Like if you're not allergic to gluten, but people are just obsessed with this. I went to a pizza place the other day. We have a little pizza place here in Wilmette.
It's all grain-free dog food.
It's what?
That's how obsessed this country is.
Oh my gosh, you're right, Sam. Gluten-free dog food. So what's this obsession with gluten?
I mean, there are people who have gluten sensitivities. I have friends with celiac, friends with like Crohn's who don't process it well. There are people who are legitimately, you know, either allergic or sensitive. But fundamentally, what people made the inferences as well, you know, you're eating a lot of processed carbs, which are probably not as filling. You know, try to eat, you know, a cup of brown rice versus, you know, I don't know, like a bunch of Cheez-Its or something like that. You know, I'm just picking something arbitrary. It comes down from the inference of like, oh, if you cut out a lot of gluten foods, or pasta is a great example, right? Try to eat a healthy amount of pasta at an American Italian restaurant. It's never going to happen. So people confuse like, oh, if I'm cutting out all these foods, well, it turns out you're probably just losing weight. And you feel better from losing weight. But there's no real benefit to it unless you have a gluten sensitivity. I think it's just a fad, and you might actually be getting something that's more processed that could be worse for you. I mean, it's hard to know.
Do you guys, Amanda, you agree?
I do agree. Yes, it's absolutely. And I think there's such a, our culture loves social media and loves this celebrity wrote this book or this athlete wrote this book. And if it's, you know, gluten-free and they said it, you know, didn't change my life and I'm a new skinny me, then they're going to try to follow it. And it is also word of mouth, right? My friend went gluten-free and she lost 20 pounds. I might as well try it. And honestly, the thing that kind of blows my mind is with a lot of these trends like gluten-free or low carb, like the rise in spina bifida in this country where we have everything at our fingertips, right? It's a deficiency in folic acid or folate that comes from whole grains, and people are cutting out this food group. And now we're like a third world country, you know, bringing back this birth defect because the mom has either cut out gluten foods, which, you know, are fortified or have this vitamin or the carbohydrate component. That's just one example. So no, it's definitely, it's more expensive and you're losing a lot of nutrients. So unless if there's a medical reason to do it, I don't recommend it.
All right, guys.
Like this, let's say you were having a bagel for breakfast or a muffin, and now you can't, and you can buy the 3 times as much cost version of it that doesn't taste half as good, or you can skip that and eat something more healthy. A lot of times people might just make a better choice, but in recent years, like even the Oreo now has a gluten-free Oreo that tastes almost exactly the same. It used to be when they were making gluten-free things at first, it was like, oh, making it with sweet potato, and like I make sweet potato pancakes with oats, and I just pulse them both together, the recipes in my cookbook, and you can just make it, and then it is gluten-free, but it's super healthy. But now people are making things that aren't healthy at all. They're making them from the most, processed of flours. And so, a lot of times they could look back and do better with the wheat, which actually comes with protein and whole grain bran and B12 vitamins that give you energy, and folate has been infiltrated into the system of grains because it's such a common food, and that's what Amanda was referring to. So I do think some people could avoid it and feel better because they have that sensitivity, but I think a lot of people are just doing it because it helps them not eat as much pizza.
All
Or it
right.
helps them not eat as much bread.
I hate to do this. We are a little bit over time. I'm going to share with you guys a quick video here. Please bear with me. We have a wonderful convention coming up in April in just 3 short weeks. Here we go. So we have our Certification Smash convention coming up where we're offering 16 different certifications all in one weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I want you guys to check it out. I want to thank you, Amanda, for joining us. Thank you, Sohailla. Thank you, Sam. You guys brought great stuff to us. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you on Thursday with another webinar. I wish we had more time. We're going to be doing a longer version of this at our Mania convention in May. So everybody, thank you, Mike Lieber, for putting this all together. And thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Good night.
Bye.